So I wanted to shift gears here for a second. I wanted to talk about our dear bell frogs. So can you kind of give us the story of when you first got them and kind of the idea, and let's go down that rabbit trail for a second and talk about them because they're a very, a very unique frog.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're such a cool frog. I'm trying to remember the history. Honestly, we got them when they were young at Josh's Frogs, when the tree frog department was definitely trying a lot of different things out. I know they still are. They've dialed in a lot of stuff since I've left, but we were, attempting to breed most things we could get our hands on that were sourced in a way that we approved of. And I think we got them at a reptile show, captive bred as young froglets. And, the idea was just let's see what we can do with them. And that's generally the idea that we go with at Josh's Frogs is these are an animal that are maybe not super well represented in the hobby. Let's try to bring them into the hobby so more people can appreciate them. And um, that's what we wanted to do. I think I probably attempted to throw them in the rain chamber a couple times and nothing happened. And, I don't have too much to say about that other than I failed.
No, I
We
wasn't
got
doing
them to
that.
call. We got them to Amplex. They just never laid eggs.
Yeah.
So I'm going to surprise you here, Jeremiah. I don't know if you remember talking to me, but I did a lot of retracing where they were, where they had lived, and when they were born. So I discovered that all of the bell frogs that you're talking about were born in October of 2019.
All
So
right. That makes sense.
because our fall is their spring. So I hunted down the guy who you got them from, and I think he was gatekeeping me, or a lot of people were gatekeeping me because I can't. They like nobody wants to say they have them if they do. I don't know why, but yeah. So I mean, the bell frog is one of the most critically endangered frogs in its natural habitat, and it's a mix between a pond frog and a tree frog because it used to be considered a ranid and now it's considered a tree frog, but it has like a mix of their behavior, and it's very very uncommon to see in the United States. But Amelia, you were their keeper before I was, so I'm just interested to hear, what are some little nuanced things that you remember about them when you had them.
Uh, Gosh, they're kind of pretty standard frog, honestly. Kind of generic, which I'm sure is not what you're going for. They're pretty shy, didn't really warm up to people all that much. Not that we were putting effort into it. I don't know if maybe you have gotten them a little bit more used to you now. But they just like to hang out on the leaves and stuff, in their little pond in their tank. I think that there was particular corner that they would hang out in the most that I was able to get some really nice kind of attractive photos of them that I sort of almost had a little bit of a stockpile going of like scenic bell frog pictures from this one corner with a lot of pathos leaves that it was like, oh boy, if we actually breed these things, I'm going to have so many photos to spam our marketing department with for promos. And then the day just never came.
If you still got those, I'd love to see them.
I can probably dig them up somewhere.
Now, let me ask you guys this, because you both had a little bit of experience with them. Did you ever see them like sitting together, like
Mhm.
not once in a while? I mean, like all of the time, like just they're together, they're buds, because they're both boys, males.
I actually have a couple of funny photos. If I can find them at some point, that actually like they would amplex in the tank sometimes, not just in the rain chamber when we had both the males and the females. And I have a couple of pretty funny shots of a pair in amplexus, and then there's another male just like going up and just staring at them, watching like a creeper, and they would just hang out like that.
I wonder which one of the three of them it was, but
You
what's
could probably tell by the markings.
yeah, I've really noticed a lot of their personality, keeping them in a 125 gallon, and I think I got like I think it's a sword fern from us. It's an Australian sword fern you guys sell, and that thing, it can grow like a weed. I can't wait to show you guys the updated version of this tank because it's literally like a forest. It's unbelievable. I started with like 2 of them, and now I have probably about 60 of those ferns. And there's
That's
another,
my dart frog tank right now.
yeah, and
I
there's
had a
another.
random volunteer fern, and now it's just shot off more ferns all over the place.
It could be the same fern, maybe.
I don't. Is it one of those real solid leaved ones, or does it have regular old fronds?
It looks like an evergreen fern that's very like long and tall, and it's like it can grow individually in the soil, even be drought tolerant. It could be a very tall fern. It would look similar to a Christmas fern if you had to put your finger on it.
Is it kind of like a wart fern?
Kind of. Yeah, that's kind of how it looks. It doesn't look like
Okay, it's
the
not the
autumn
same
fern.
thing then.
Okay.
The ones that I have showing up here are, I don't know if they are, but they're a very stereotypical fern-looking fern.
But I have seen some really unique behavior in those bell frogs. I've seen them whenever they want, they go over and bask. I've watched 2 of the males, like they just seem like, I don't know why. The third one, they just kind of like banish. Like he doesn't even sit on the same side as them. But the 2 of them, like one of them burrowed into the into the background because I have expanding foam and then coconut husk, and somehow he found his little home in there, and it's just so cute because like you look in and then he'll just be asleep and then he'll just like get up and look at you, and like he thinks he's in a great spot, but like you could easily see him. The other one just stays up, and sometimes they both will just stay up on the top of the tank. But yeah, I was able to hand feed those guys a good bit. They're kind of like a cat. Like if they want to be hand fed, they will, but if they don't, they'll jump and pee away and they'll make a scream, and it could wake you up in the middle of the night because you're like not expecting a frog to react that way.
I'm impressed that you're able to get them to hand feed at all, honestly. I can't see them being willing to let us do that when they were at Josh's.
I do remember them being pretty skittish, yeah.
2 of the 3 were always good, but I haven't done it lately. I've kind of let them explore the forest, how thick that is, because I know that that's what they needed. But I think I also want to talk about this is something different you guys hadn't had the chance to see, but having them live with White's tree frogs is something I always wanted to have, like a mixed species Australian tank with like frogs that it could work with, because I know White's tree frogs are notorious for being very aggressive hunters, and if it's a small enough frog, they would have probably just taken it. I can easily see Max eating another frog. But they seem to not have any problems. Like I've seen them sitting together on the branches, and like if they're hunting, only Max will snap at the bell frogs, but she'll snap at the White's tree frogs too. She's like an Indonesian. She looks like an Indonesian White's tree frog. She just has the different coloration. She has no blue phase at all to her. The other 2 are males and they're Australians. I got them at Reptile Expos. Max is my first ever frog pretty much in 2014. So she's going to be 10 this August, which is unbelievable. But it's just been, I think it's been really rewarding, but it's going to suck for me editing videos about this tank because it's become so dense. It literally looks like a dry forest. It's so thick that I don't know, like if you would try to like put your hand through it, I think you'd get it stuck. I can't wait to show a lot of the viewers that. I did put a peace lily in because I know that they are sometimes grown outdoors in some of the growing zones out there. But it's actually flowering, like it's blooming, which is unbelievable. But yeah, I don't have a big water feature in there for the bell frogs yet, since there's no females. I'm like, well, do I want to kind of tease them with that, or do I want to just kind of give them water dishes? If I found a female, there would be a water feature, but at this point, smaller.
I'm sure they'll utilize it, whatever you give them.
Yeah, I see them all the time, like sitting in the water dish and hanging out. I'm sure they'd like a better water feature, but I don't know, maybe that time will come.
That enclosure was like 2/3 water, half water, something like that.
Yeah, this is a little bit more forest. I did have a water bin in there, but because I have to deworm them regularly with my whites, I just didn't want to keep playing around with like the water feature if it had a boatload of parasites. That's why I decided to go like smaller water dishes for them. But at some point I might go back to that. Everybody looks like they're doing really well in there. So, and with it being really dry, like I'll turn the misting system on even for like 15 minutes, and there is absolutely no water that goes to the bottom. Like the roots in there all drink the water as soon as it hits the ground. So I don't know how viable that is for a parasite to live if it's that dry. Even if it rains, like if I missed it, for multiple days, 15 minutes a day, like they drink it before it even gets into the soil. So it's really interesting to see how that ecosystem has it looks like it should be an Australian forest. It's not like I put a bunch of plants together and said, oh, here it is. A bunch of the native plants that are growing in, and I don't know, it'd be interesting to get somebody on here to talk about that and see like what their thoughts are. But yeah, I don't know, the 125 gallons for three bell frogs and 3 white tree frogs, it seems like it's going well.
Yeah, that's cool, man. I think it would be cool to hear someone who yeah, we've obviously kept a lot of white tree frogs, and I think the idea of keeping them in a naturalistic environment is always daunting just because of how much waste they produce. So that's interesting that you're talking about it sort of stays dry, because I've always thought that would kind of be the key to them, to not let it get super wet and gross.
That's kind of how mine is. There's really well established pothos and stuff in my bioactive whites tank, and it tends to kind of suck up the moisture fairly quickly. They just then go and make a mess of their ledges and their water dish, and that's what I have to clean.
Yeah.
But the pothos is, it's as thick around as my fingers, my thumbs now. It's getting
That's
to be
crazy.
a big sturdy plant.
Yeah, it can be a bush in the wild, right? Like, can't it actually become a bush?
And it can get to be like, dozens of feet long, stuff like that. If you've ever been to the Detroit Zoo, they have some really nice long pothos in I think they're it's not their water monitor, it's like a caiman enclosure or something like that, some kind of crocodilian. They've got like a really neat waterfall cliff kind of a landscaped feature that has pothos growing down from it. I'm sure I've seen the kind of thing at other zoos as well. It makes a really dramatic, easy to maintain kind of a vine feature.
Well, let me ask you guys this, and Jeremiah, we'll start with you, but what are your thoughts on so you see the zoological enclosures, and that we've had a few guys on the podcast who know what it looks like when you're trying to really create a good enclosure, and Amelia knows that too. Like, going to work every day and you see this is what it's supposed to look like, and then trying to come home and recreate that, or like, I guess speaking even to the community for the frog and toad, like for the herp community as a whole. I mean, do you think that the aim should be to try to recreate like how the zoos are, as big of an enclosure, as bioactive of an enclosure as possible? Or do you think that, I guess it's more like snakes are kept in racks and stuff like that, but like, where are you at with keeping things as natural as possible versus whatever works for you is like the answer, I guess, because there's like different extremes.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think definitely always depends on the species, and yeah, you should do what works for you and the animal. So I think there are a number of different ways to keep things. I do definitely appreciate the large, well-planted vivariums, but then I work with a lot of more sparse, easier to clean enclosures where I don't feel the animals are suffering in any sort of welfare or enrichment standard either. So, it can go either way. And it's just, it is what works for you and the animal. So, yeah.
I would kind of echo what Jeremiah said. If you have the know-how and the space and stuff to do a bioactive, naturalistic kind of an enclosure, then that's great. Lots of live plants and things are great enrichment and shelter and whatnot for your animals. But if you have an animal that has like maybe some chronic health concerns, or you don't feel like you're confident that you're going to be able to actually keep that kind of a thing sanitary or whatever, then like I guess don't feel ashamed if that's something that's not attainable for you yet, or for every species that you keep, as long as you're making sure that the environmental parameters are being met and there's enough shelter and whatnot for that animal to live and not be stressed. It can be a bit more case by case and stuff.
Yeah, we've had some good conversations on here about animal husbandry, and I'm not sure if you've seen a whole lot of them, Jeremiah. We had a guy from Germany on here. We've had Mac from Tar Heel Ants, Sean from Bruce Pets. Like, we've had some interesting perspectives on reptile and amphibian keeping. So yeah, it's just I try to give some of these guys, including yourself, like give you guys an opportunity to kind of talk about this, to hear where everybody's at, the differing opinions, and just hearing it from guys who have been actually doing something like this in their job description. Because
Sort of a personal take opinion that I have, that I know not everyone necessarily shares or prioritizes or whatever, is that generally most frogs, like, they don't really seem to care about other frogs being in their space or whatever, unless it's breeding season, or with the exception of certain species that are maybe a bit more aggressive towards each other, like some dart frogs or glass frogs, pixie frogs, things like that. But regardless, when I can, I personally prefer to keep multiple frogs in the same enclosure rather than just a singleton, because even if they're not necessarily getting any kind of meaningful social interaction out of the presence of another animal there, it's another form of stimulation for enrichment that you can provide, having a conspecific there. They've got something else in that other animal that they can see, they can smell, they can hear. So even if it's not a social thing for most species, it's just another form of stimulation that you can provide, if that's something, again, that's feasible for your enclosure and the species you keep.
I mean, I think that that's true, but I also think that it's very underrated right now in terms of artificial care of frogs and toads, because just seeing the personality of American toads and pond frogs, how they'll try to get to the food bowl first and they'll try to starve each other. I don't know if you've seen that too, Jeremiah, but I've just seen like the bigger animals seem to do that, but like my bell frogs don't. Max will get hers, and then everybody else eats after her. That's just how it works for the dynamics of their social behavior, if you will. But like personally for me, I have the 242 gallon, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but I don't think it's big enough, in my personal opinion, to see two female American toads thrive. Like, I just don't think, from how much they eat and like what their personality is, I personally don't feel like it would be enough space to see two females if they were both healthy and both actively competing. I think that could put them in a bad scenario, because somebody's going to outcompete the other, and then what does that do for the welfare of the other animal? It's very different if you're keeping them in breeding colonies, but if you're keeping them in a like a bioactive enclosure with you're trying to replicate dynamics in an ecosystem, I just think that what I've witnessed personally in captivity and in the wild, I've seen dynamics of especially bufonids and ranids and even some hylids, migratory frogs. The females
like
would
I
go at
said,
it.
like tinctorius dart frogs are notorious for doing that exact kind of thing with the competition, even if it's not outright aggression. Like, you got to know your species and your individuals, and it's part of being a responsible keeper is if you try a grouping and it's apparent that somebody's out competing another or being aggressive or whatever, have that plan, that space and stuff to separate those animals if you need to.
I mean, Jeremiah, what's your take on that, with seeing probably dozens of frogs together? Is that a problem where some will try to outcompete the others, or like what do you see?
Yeah, I think that can definitely happen, but that's just so like when we raise toadlets, my supervisor is he likes to feed them twice a day, which, that's something that us at home might not always have the opportunity to do, but that's if you're going to keep like 10 or more toadlets together, you should be providing them because with as much food as possible, really. And I think that can be the constraint sometimes of
That
enclosures
has
that,
got to be a very time-consuming task if you're doing whole
sure,
clutches of toadlets and doing that twice a day. Those things are popping out hundreds, thousands of babies.
Yeah.
definitely. And yeah, so like the ideal scenario would be able to provide as much food as possible and uh, have extra, left over without the food, uh, the feeders then like dying and fouling the enclosure or stressing the animals out. So that's definitely a struggle we all know is just like, how do you raise these animals with providing them just like basically what they would get in the wild, which, in a suitable habitat, they're finding food all the time. These froglets and toadlets never really would go too long without food. So that's a struggle that I think we face is you don't want to dump 1,000 crickets in there and then just have them grow up in the tank with the frogs. So
Of course, it's so much different when you're doing some kind of a massive program like that, where you're breeding things for release, for sale, whatever, versus somebody keeping things in their home just for fun.
sure,
Somebody who's got just a couple of tanks, it's a totally different experience.
when you can hand feed them and make sure they're each
Mm-hmm.
getting 2 roaches.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been able to target train my toads.
Nice.
I don't know if you guys, Jeremiah, if you guys do anything like that at the zoo for the adults.
No, that's interesting. I will occasionally attempt to hand feed maybe an animal that might be an older animal that I just want to make sure he gets a cricket or something, but target feeding, no, tell me about that.
So it's another plug for Josh's frogs, but when I get the insects from them, the lid of that like uh, plastic dish, basically like that round lid, I put it in the enclosure, and then the toads know. It's specifically toads that know this. I don't know, nobody else really seems to care, but the toads all do. So they'll sit at the target as long as they can until like more food comes in. So once they learn that the food is on the dish, they're just gonna go sit there. Like the females more than the males, but they just sit there. Like Ace, Navi did it, but Ace is like the queen of sitting on the dish, or she'll have her like front leg on the dish, just looking at you. It'd be almost like a dog begging. But they'll eat it. They'll eat right on the thing. They won't move a whole lot, because they think, well, at any moment he could drop food in, so I gotta be around. But I've seen Ace kick other frogs and toads out of the target too. Like she just comes up, she's so big, and she'll try. They almost look like basketball players, how they try to like box each other out with their butts. And she does. She always wins because she's just big. But they've all done it. The males know. I haven't done it yet with the toad that I got wrist surgery for. Long story short, one rainy night I was out. It was a busy road, and I saw a toad that looked like he was wounded in the middle of the street in October, and it's like late already for toads to be out. Took him in, found out that he had a wrist. His wrist was broken 2 different places. Spent We're going on probably 3,000 for him, so it's a lot of money. I didn't expect it to be as much, but we're getting him to the point where hopefully in the next month I could start rehabbing him to prepare him to go in the big tank. I haven't used any targets with him yet, so it'll be interesting to see if he learns that and he uses it. But like the gray tree
How are you
frogs,
keeping that bone set? Does he have like a tiny cast on or some pins or something? Like how do you do that with an animal that's always hopping around? And like frogs are notorious for not bothering to kind of consider not putting weight on injured limbs. That's a thing that I've read about that I was like, yeah, gosh, that is accurate. I've definitely seen that.
Yeah, she put 3 pins in his, like, going from right above his like phalanges, like right here, and there's like 3 iron pins, and then they're going like in between his wrist. So there's like these, I don't know, it's like a green holder or whatever where the pins are going to. So he sits kind of like this, like he'll sit with it up a lot. I don't know. He finally can move it. She just like trimmed it a little bit, so he's finally able to start messing around with it. He was heavily sedated yesterday because she took some X-rays to see where it's at, and it looks like in 2 weeks we could take it fully off. Thankfully, he's a very expensive toad now, so you know it better work. She was surprised though. I don't know if you guys have come across this, but frogs and toads that were wounded, she said she's actually never seen somebody successfully get a wounded frog or toad like to the finish line where it survived from a severe injury like that. Do you
I had a
guys?
toad for a while that I found after a raccoon attack, and that thing was missing like a whole hind leg and parts of the front legs and stuff. And what did her in eventually, I think, was something related to egg binding. It wasn't anything to do with the bones, but she was actually once the wrists had healed, and the hands and stuff were totally severed. There was no like fixing broken bones. It was just the raccoon had chewed things off. There was actually these little fleshy protrusions that started growing out of the nubs, like her fingers were trying to grow back, but like it wasn't quite right because there was like no bone or anything in there. It was just these like weird little creepy finger nubbins, and that was really interesting. Kind of wish that I had gotten her X-ray to see what those would look like actually, but I didn't know of a place that would do that at the time, and it probably wouldn't have been cheap.
So you think she became egg bound?
I'm thinking so, yeah. She got really wide, wasn't eating, and after she passed, I was just kind of curious, borrowed a dissection kit from a local science teacher and opened her up just out of curiosity to see if I had figured out any idea of what might have happened, or at least see how the bone healing looked, because I was curious about that, like on the stump of the leg and stuff. And she was just full of eggs, so I imagine it was something to do with that.
Could
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get those bones cleaned off to really take a look at that. I was hoping that I could kind of process them a little bit anyway and just see that, but I didn't really have a good way to deflesh or anything. Like this was like 8-ish years ago. This was a while ago. And I just tried like basically burying her in the dirt to dig up later and in like a box with holes in it and see if just like the microbes and whatnot would do a good enough job. Super rough, and some skunk or something just like dug her up and ate her like the first night. So
oh my
that did
god.
not work out at all. At some point, I got to get some domestic beetles when I have a space for them and do that kind of thing properly. But I live in an apartment and they're smelly.
Yeah. Now, could parasites have been another reason why she wasn't eating? Because I've seen that. Like that's why I have to always.
It's possible. Like I never had her dewormed or anything. That wasn't a thing that I knew how to do yet at the time, but she had been eating fine up until the point that she seemed to be gaining weight and stuff. So I figured that was coinciding with her becoming gravid.
Because that's what I've seen was pinworms and then the rhabdius nematodes together. I think the pinworms were the ones that would stop them from eating, and then the nematodes were suffocating them in their lungs. So I think whenever it happened to my toads, I saw some problems because they would literally just get lazy. Like I know people say toads are lazy, but they wouldn't want to eat. They wouldn't really want to move. They would just sit there all day and look like they're sort of bloated. And this even happened to males. It wasn't even just like it happened to females. So that's why like it sounds very similar to what I've seen. Like one of my toads who passed away last year, Pius, that's what happened to him. Is he wouldn't really eat much, but he just looked overweight. And it's like I know he's starving. I know he's hungry. Why won't he eat? But long story short, they couldn't actually figure out what was going on until the end. I think that had a part of it, and also we had a water crisis with the reverse osmosis system. But the pinworms and the rhabdias really, I know from even Wellsboro, he's like a 100-gram American toad, and like he was nothing but bone. Like he was just so skinny whenever he had the parasites. So I just saw like they can get to the point where they'll starve if anything. But yeah, it's just something to think about, especially if people are keeping American toads. Like deworming them can put years back on their life just by doing something like that. How long did the toad live for that you had?
I believe I only had it for around a year and a half. I mean, it was fully grown at the time, though. Like, this was a big female, like, not as big as, like, your Ace. Ace is enormous, but, like, a standard size for what you would expect generally on average. And then I think she did get a little bit larger over the time that I had her because I was feeding her well and she didn't have as much body to be putting nutrients towards anymore. Like